This is Ed Rep Radio, presented by Eastman Music Company. This is Ed Rep Radio, a podcast to bring you ideas and information from industry experts you can use on the road every day. Presented by Eastman Music Company, and I'm your host, Shane Deuel.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
At the most recent NASMD in Tucson, Arizona, Scott Leamon, also a regional sales director for Eastman Music Company, and myself presented a session to Ed Reps entitled From Milk Run to Milky Way, hence the space music. We received some great feedback on this session afterwards and wanted to present it to you here on Ed Rep Radio. Our goal is to help you go from milk runs, and we'll explain what that is, to knocking your goals out of this world. Scott Leamon, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This is going to be fun. You and I did this presentation a few times now, and every time we do it, we seem to hone in on a little bit better way to do it every single time. But just to recap those who were maybe not at NASMD in this last session back in Tucson, Scott Leamon and I did this session for the Ed Reps. Well, when was that, Scott? Saturday morning?
Yeah, I think it was the last day of the conference.
Yeah, that's right. And we just got some good feedback, and it seemed to really be useful for the Ed Reps in the room. So we thought we'd bring it to Ed Rep Radio and do basically the presentation exactly the way we did it. But before we launch into this session and this topic, I want to have everyone learn a bit more about you, Scott. How did you get to Eastman, and what was kind of your pathway through the music industry?
Well, it's a kind of interesting story, but I'll just start how I got started. Back in 1986, at the age of 15, I actually got to work for my local music store here in Chattanooga. My dad, being a professional saxophone player, the owner of that store, he taught him saxophone lessons. So Giant Steps is the name of the store, and for those who are jazz enthusiasts, that was the name of one of John Coltrane's tunes. So at 15, what do you do in a music store? Well, I guess you start cleaning toilets and sweeping floors and doing anything that the guy tells you to do. And then that transpired through all of my middle school, or excuse me, junior high school, and then all the way through high school. And then I was able to work part of my college years. So I was there from 1986 through 97.
Okay.
And during that time, learned retail. And for the last 5 years of that, I really got to work as a repairman. So being a brass tech and a woodwind tech. Then I had the opportunity to accept a job with Ken Stanton Music in Atlanta. And I moved there in 97 and worked there for 2 years managing the repair shop. And I was doing some basically dropping off repairs to some schools. Lo and behold, I had the opportunity. I got contacted by a guy named Chris Toole from Music and Arts Center, and I started working for them in 1999. And I worked there all the way up through the end of 2005. So they were looking for basically an Ed Rep to call on Northwest Georgia and the Atlanta metro area. And I was kind of the person, and then I expanded that, was able to hire reps as I needed them, and then I was managing that territory. It became then the whole state of Georgia. So in 2006 is when I started with Eastman. A good friend of mine who had been a manufacturer rep for Gemeinhart a long, long time, and a very dear friend and mentor, Ronnie Bush, had told me about this company called Eastman Strings. And he knew that my ambition was to be a manufacturer rep at some point. That was the goal. So here we are. I mean, now I've started my 17th year with Eastman.
Wow.
And so I've kind of seen it from its infancy,
Right.
how our company has grown.
And it
I
changed
think
so much since you started, hasn't it?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Somebody, I think at every sales meeting always says, what was it like back then? And I said, well, there's a lot of it I don't remember because some of them are not as, they're not the most pleasant stories because we were young and we were crawling and our product wasn't what it is today.
Mhm.
And so, but I think that's what makes us who we are today because you don't forget where you came from.
Right.
And
You learn from those challenges, right?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we continue to learn as every time we go through a new year, we always figure out, well, we could probably do something better. So
Yeah. So you and I actually come from fairly similar backgrounds. We were ed reps and ed rep managers before working for Eastman. And the topic of ed reps, being an ed rep, the challenges you and I used to face, we talked about it in the last year or so. And you came up with this amazing idea for a session for NASMD titled From Milk Run to Milky Way. So, Scott, in this format, since people can't see the slideshow that we had at NASMD, we'll basically, if you were at the session, Scott and I went back and forth. He would do one slide and I would do the next slide, but it did have some visual to it. So we'll basically describe the slide that's up at the time, and then someone will explain it. So we'll start off with that first milk run slide. And maybe, Scott, let's just do a little role playing since it goes back and forth on this slide. And there's a photo, just so to give you a visual if you're listening while you're driving. Imagine your truck is a milk truck and you're the milkman, literally dropping off milk from house to house. That's the photo that's up right now. So, Scott, why don't you be the ed rep? I'll be the educator, and we'll just kind of roll through the typical milk run.
All right, let's go. Hi, Frank. How are you doing? I brought your reeds that you wanted.
Thanks, Bill.
Got any repairs for me?
Yeah, I do. Can I have them back next week?
I'll see what I can do. Do you need anything else?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks.
See you next week.
And that's the milk run.
Yeah, that's kind of the typical day in, day out visiting schools.
Yeah, and the reason for this session, we're going to the next slide. There's actually a pretty funny flute taking off into outer space. And by the way, I'm going to put this slideshow in the episode notes so that you can actually download all the PDFs of this slideshow. And if you like, you can actually follow along at the slideshow as we're doing this podcast. So the Milky Way, this is something obviously way beyond, if you can imagine, just blasting your numbers and your performance into outer space, because it's so much bigger and better than the typical milk run. And what we're about to go through will hopefully help you go through some different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking about the job that will allow you to just go way beyond that typical milk run. So why don't we start with the route? That's something that you do day in and day out. The slide says, milk run, route, Milky Way, organize your route.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but a lot of times when we talk about a route, running it the most geographically way that is without crossing over the same school 3 times. And a lot of times when we talk about a route, everybody's, well, I've got to see my teacher at this time. And that's the same time that 4 other teachers want you to see them. And you're going, well, how does that work? Well, how do I do that? Well, there's only one of you, and you can't meet everyone at their planning time. So those are conversations that a rep is going to have with those other 3 teachers and say, this is how I'm running this route. Can we work out a way to where I can still come by, but we can still have other ways of communication, because obviously I don't want to interrupt your class time. Sometimes when I would do that, they would leave a clipboard right by the door, and there would be notes for me to do, and we would kind of do that way because there was no such thing as a text. Email was just sort of coming out at that time. So, but it worked out pretty well, and they had an area on the floor that was taped in a square, so if there was a repair or we had a rental and it needed just a minor fix, I would do that on the spot. So again, I kind of ran a route from north to south. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning, and you'd have to be at the neck of the school, let's just say 7:30, and then by 3:30 you're done at the end of the day. I said this in one of the presentations. I think sometimes stores right now, everybody's trying to grow their route, and I've always wondered, are you really, when you look at a route, are you really going out further to get more business? Because what does that look like as far as cost? Because if you're trying to grow your piece of the pie, how much further are you going out to do that?
Right. Especially with gas prices right now, right?
Oh, absolutely. I know every dealer and every rep listening to this they're probably pumping excess of, if you're running a route every day, and I would think you could be easily $400 or $500 a week in gas.
Ouch.
Depending on where you are in the country. So I think an ed rep right now listening to this, you're going back to school here in a month. Maybe you've got a new account. Maybe you've got a couple of new accounts. Maybe it's a new road rep. Sitting with your manager or whoever you report to and really running a route the most efficient way is right now the best time to be sitting down and looking at where you're going to go. Why are we going here? And is this, again, you're organizing this route to be as most efficient. And for you, time is everything. So I think doing this podcast now, I think this is so important because we are on another month. Everybody's going to be back on the road, really hitting it hard with band camps and things like that. So I can't stress this one enough.
Yeah, you and I both have talked about the fact that we ride along with ed reps all around the country now, which is really amazing, coming from being an ed rep to basically observing how all sorts of different ed reps do their job, which is kind of a great 50,000 foot view of being an ed rep. And I know so many times you and I both have been in the car with an ed rep from a music store, and we'll pass a middle school on the way to another school. And then we'll go back past that same middle school again to another school, past that same middle school again to another school, and then finally come back to that school that we passed 3 times to visit that teacher. And I know a lot of ed reps say they want to visit during their prep period, but sometimes that's just not practical. And I find the better relationship you have with the teachers, a lot of times they're more flexible, allowing you to come in maybe even just before rehearsal starts or something like that. And it doesn't have to be in a prep period.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think you got to have that conversation. Yeah. And I think a lot of times an ed rep just doesn't want to. Path of least resistance is sometimes always easier than trying to talk to them and say, can I come at this time? You won't know until you ask.
All right, next slide. So the slide says Milk Run, brief communication. Milky Way, ask the right questions. This is, to me, one of the most important ones, because if you think about how that typical milk run went that Scott and I role played, there wasn't really a whole lot of communication going on. It's very basic. Do you need anything? Yes, no. It was quick in and out, but there wasn't really any substance to the conversation. And if that milk run kind of describes your typical conversation with a teacher day after day after day, stop after stop after stop, I think you're leaving a lot on the table where you could ask really good questions of these teachers and uncover what they really need. Uncover things that maybe you wouldn't know otherwise without asking questions and digging in. Like, hey, how are your beginners looking next year? They're not looking great. They're going down. Oh, well, why don't we recruit? Or what's on your wish list this year? So we can look ahead and start planning for needs that you have. Oh yeah, well, I'm looking for a few tubas. I need a sousaphone. I need some saxophones. Sometimes without just asking those questions, you don't actually get the needs from the teacher. They might just be shopping online for these things and looking for them. But if you don't dig in and ask questions, you won't find the potential, all the opportunities that are sitting out there. And asking really good questions has another effect. And we'll talk a little bit later about this, but it builds relationships. If you ask teachers really good questions and you're digging information out of them, both personal and professional. Ask about how their family's doing. Have they gone on any vacations? Get to know them as a person, and also get to know their professional needs and things like that. And if you're asking really good questions, they're doing most of the talking. And if they're doing most of the talking, you're doing most of the listening. And it shows that you really care. It shows that you're really interested in them. And if you do most of the listening and they're doing most of the talking, you're actually building trust. You're building a relationship. Because what is everybody's favorite topic? Typically, it's themselves. So if you allow the teacher to talk about themselves and you ask questions about them and they're giving you information, they're realizing that you're listening, you're getting to know them, that you really care about them, and they'll start to feel like those are great conversations. And when you leave, they feel great because they just had the opportunity to talk about themselves for a little while. So ask good questions, do most of the listening, have the teacher do most of the talking, and you'll build solid relationships that way. If it's the other way around, where you find maybe you're just naturally a chatty person, you may have to work a little harder to ask the questions and get the teacher to do most of the talking. If you do it, I think you'll see a big turnaround in how solid your relationships are with the teachers. Next slide. Go ahead, Scott.
So the milk run, only walk in with orders. The Milky Way, walk in with samples, information, ideas, solutions. This is probably one thing that I even asked, what's your ed rep like in your market? And everyone typically says they're great. They come by every week, but they don't bring anything in. They don't have nothing to show. They're just bringing what I asked. And I learned really early on, if you bring something in, and it could be as small as a mouthpiece, it could be a tuner, but if you present it in a way that it's the best thing since sliced bread, then you become all-knowing. And it may be what you're wanting out of this is not so much to sell that mouthpiece or the tuner, but you're giving value every time you walk in, that you have product. These are things that we carry, we stock. And sometimes it's not always about selling that particular thing, but it's to get the director to say, I don't need that, and I appreciate you showing that, but I am interested in, I really need trombone mouthpiece or whatever it is. The whole idea is to keep them intrigued in what you do as a ed rep and what your company stocks. I've seen ed reps, they'll say, yeah, I've been calling on that account and I walked in and there was a whole new drum line. Or they bought a tuba and they didn't buy it from me. Well, whose fault is that? I mean, that reflects on the ed rep. I mean, those are things you could have been walking in. Again, going back to your slide that you just did, I mean, you didn't ask the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
So walking in with something, just like we do now when we visit an educator, I'm not walking in to talk just about me. Obviously, that's important, but I'm bringing our product in so we have a conversation and they know that's what I'm bringing in too. So solutions, ideas, I used to bring in articles, like something that was about, hey, this was in one of the B&O magazines and it was talking about how to build on recruiting. I thought this might be really helpful. Maybe we ought to try this. Just something. It doesn't always have to be product. But I mean, Shane, you probably, in your time on the road, I mean, you probably walked in with various things. I mean, those kind of things, I think, again, your competition is not doing that. And why not be the guy that they rely on? Because the drum line that the guy bought from another vendor, you're going to turn that around and they're going to start relying on you, because you should be that knowledgeable as an ed rep to meet all needs if your store is equipped to do that, which I would say most of our dealers are out here in the market.
Mm-hmm. So the next slide is somewhat related to what you were just talking about, Scott. Milk run, be an order taker. Milky Way, be a trusted advisor. Really, anybody can take orders. It's simple to write down the product that the teacher is asking for and deliver the product. And honestly, Amazon does a great job of that too, and which is why a lot of teachers will just simply go online and order it. What you need to do is bring much more value to the teacher. And by bringing value, it means, like Scott was just talking about, bringing information about products that will work really well for that teacher, bringing in samples, bringing in knowledge, so that if a teacher says, I'm having some issues with my clarinet section, they're playing rather flat. A trusted advisor would be someone who has the knowledge about, say, clarinet mouthpieces, who can then advise the teacher, well, if you try these mouthpieces, they have these tendencies, and they could probably help your clarinet's intonation. And then you bring in those mouthpieces, and the teacher realizes that, yes, this thing you just recommended really changed my section, and you fulfilled a need. And that's really the key to being a trusted advisor. It goes from the teacher saying, hey, could I get this model and this so-and-so ordered? It goes from that to basically, hey, I need a new tuba for my band room. What do you recommend? At that point, if the teachers are asking you for advice like that, then you've actually become a trusted advisor, because they look at you as a resource. They look at you as someone who knows much more than them about what works best for their program. And instead of going to do research themselves or going online to order something, or even asking their fellow teacher what should they get, they actually come to you. And when that happens, then obviously they respect you for your knowledge, and they'll tend to do more business with you because you're going to recommend things typically that you carry at the store. So going from order taker to trusted advisor, actually, there was a great episode on EdRep Radio where Ryan Richmond talked specifically about becoming a trusted advisor. And if you haven't listened to that one, Ryan does a really great job. But this is a really big one. It elevates you much beyond just being the milk run driver and the order taker. Teachers start to really look to you for advice. Go ahead, Scott.
Milk run. Need anything? That was kind of in our first presentation. The Milky Way, be observant, seek out their needs, and fulfill them. Yeah, every time I walked in a band room, I was always wanting to see what was on the walls, what was laying in the floor, what was damaged. I walked in their office. What do they have out on their desk? What are they currently looking at? I think a lot of times you can tell just visually what you see. Typically, you can tell if a band director is very organized or not organized by the amount of stuff that's on their desk. Typically, it'll actually overlap into their teaching, how the chairs are stacked, or they're not stacked, or the stands are tipped over. So, those kind of things can lead into what you're going to ask next, or what you may bring on the next call. When I talked about bringing stuff in, those things will mean a lot to a director that you took notice of something. You probably will also be able to tell this is going to be a high maintenance account with repairs, because all the instruments are laying out in no cases. I used to see all the tubas, and they would never be in cases. And of course, all the bells were all bashed in, and the crooks. And I'm like, they never put them up. So those kind of things will also tell you when your competitor's been there.
Right.
The business cards that are laying out on the desk, or you see the calendar they put up and it's not your calendar. So you can tell a lot by what's going on in that particular setting. And the more times that you start looking at things and being observant that way, the better you'll be walking into the next time you're there. I used to take notes when I'd go out. I'd have a legal pad, and I'd go out to the car and I'd write things down that I thought that were just things that I thought they were kind of frivolous, but they did turn into things that, again, it got the educator to open up and talk to me about whatever I asked, or if I brought in. I mean, it's those subtle things that you'll rise to the occasion of being the company of choice if you're not already. So those are just some little things that I did, and little tricks and trade, and that's why we added this slide. So
yeah, good one. All right, next one. Milk run. Objective, get in and out as quickly as possible. Milky Way. Have an objective every visit that moves towards a larger goal. Riding around with ed reps around the country and knowing I did this myself all the time when I was an ed rep, typically you walk into the school and you're somewhat reactive to what happens that day. Maybe you didn't have a goal in mind or anything you wanted to accomplish. Your goal was literally to get in and out as fast as you can so you can move on to the next school and be done for the day. But if you don't have a goal, you kind of just are in this reactive mode. And of course, if they have an order for you, a repair for you, then you'll take it. You'll service their needs there. But the best ed reps I notice have some sort of objective that they want to accomplish every visit. And that objective doesn't have to be some massive commitment from the teacher. And the best would be actually just one small step towards a larger commitment. And if you want, listened to the action selling episode a couple episodes ago, CJ Collins, the vice president of training there, says it really well. They call it a commitment objective, where you want some small commitment from your customer, from your teacher, to then advance towards something much bigger. Like maybe your goal is to set up an exclusive rental night with this teacher. And you map out how you're going to get there, how you're going to get to that bigger goal. You map out these small commitments that teachers need to make in order to get there. So maybe one visit, for example, would be to simply ask the teacher if they would mind setting up a specific meeting with you. Maybe going back to what Scott was saying, maybe you're there and it's not the prep period. You're just before rehearsal, and your one goal for that visit is to see if you can set up a specific meeting during their prep period or after school to sit down with them, to ask them questions, to understand better their needs for beginning band. That's it. Your goal that day is simply to set up a meeting. So you get out your calendars, you find a meeting time that works, and then you go to that meeting. Obviously, ask lots of great questions, uncover their needs, get to know their struggles, their frustrations. Maybe they're working with a different store at the time. You can understand what they like or maybe don't like about their current provider. And your commitment that day, your commitment objective is to set up maybe one more meeting that you bring samples of your product, your beginning band instruments or your beginning orchestra instruments, to show this teacher what it is you do and even walk them through your contract. So the commitment objective of that first meeting is to set up another meeting to follow up, to proceed further. And you just go little step, and before you know it, you've actually progressed them towards this bigger goal. It's kind of like when you're playing football, you want first down, then first down, then first down, touchdown. So having these little objectives for every single visit will help you probably speed these processes up because it's very well thought out and you're specifically what you want to achieve that day. But without an objective, without a goal, you're just kind of like a boat without a rudder when you walk into these visits and you're just reacting to things. But going in with an objective, I promise, will change how much you accomplish during each visit, each month, and each year with your teachers. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, the milk run. Sorry, I forgot to bring ... The Milky Way follow up every time. I know we've got a lot on our mind, and the director said next week, can you bring me these mallets and a box of reeds and whatever? And obviously we just talked about you get in and out and you're on to the next thing. If you're not writing things down, I'm kind of old school. I told you I use a legal pad and I still do. I know now everybody's got the iPad, but I think once you start writing notes to yourself and send them, the educator, them, kind of a follow-up email, maybe a text, and reiterate during that visit what was important that you took away from that. That'll show them how much you care and how much attention you've given to that account. I'm not going to say you're never going to forget something, but the likelihood of that is it's a reminder for you, and it's a great way to just to know that they're important, that you're kind of on top of that for them. Because again, if another competitor is going in there, they're not going to ask that competitor for that because they trust you, and they have you've acknowledged what was important and what you wanted, or what they wanted, excuse me. But those little things like that, a subtle follow-up, is so important, I think, just because I really believe that's the key of this service. This is why I was so adamant about doing a session like this. So
Mm-hmm. And I think that term follow up has a couple meanings too. And follow up can also mean just making sure that if you say you're going to do something, you actually do it. I always say if you can follow up or do what you say you'll do 100% of the time, you will be better than 100% of the other ed reps out there. Because this is such a big thing. If you do what you say you will do every single time, teachers very much start to trust you. And it also starts to highlight that maybe your competitors drop the ball once in a while. If you're super solid and you always do what you say you'll do, then people just know that when they ask you to do something or you say you'll do it, they just know and they trust it'll get done.
yeah, exactly.
All right. So the next category or the next area in this Milk Run to Milky Way presentation is all about relationships. And we'll go through a few slides here regarding the topic of relationships. Starting with the first one, Milk Run. I think they play saxophone. Milky Way builds a solid relationship. So I find the best ed reps, you could ask them, let's say you walk into a high school and you're about to go see this teacher. And I see this when I ride around with ed reps, and I'm sure you do too, Scott. This ed rep will be able to say what they play, how long they've taught there, what college they went to, what their challenges are, what their family, married with a couple of children, and the dog's name. I mean, an ed rep knows so much about that teacher. Going back to another episode with George Quinlan, he actually quizzes his ed reps about, hey, what's this person's dog's name? And just to see how well each ed rep really knows their teachers. But what's the point? Why? Why do you want a good, solid relationship? One thing that George Quinlan says that I really liked is you have equity in that relationship. If something goes wrong, and things do go wrong, and you have a great relationship with that teacher, they'll say, you know what, no big deal. We'll figure it out. You take such good care of us. This is just a little bump on the road. We'll figure it out. But if you don't have a good relationship, sometimes one little thing will just simply end the business with that teacher. That teacher will say, you know what, I don't need to work with you. I have this other ed rep that does what they say they'll do every single time. Forget it. I'll just go work with them. And also having a solid relationship is just on a very human level. People do business with people they like. So if you have a good relationship with somebody, you're much more likely to just have all the doors open to opportunities like your rentals and step ups and school biz and all the things that teachers do. If you have a solid relationship, then people will simply do business with people they like. But it does take work. It takes very specific action from you, the ed rep, to build that relationship through asking good questions, following up every time, making sure that you're really there for them and you show them that you care. You can't build a solid ed rep relationship with your teachers without those things.
Yeah, the next slide that we talk about is, it says Milk Run. Colleges with a question mark, too busy. The Milky Way, seek out future customers, your educational majors. During my tenure as an ed rep, I had a couple of universities that were in my area that I called on, and I would go by at least once a month. But the reason I went by there was to talk to the kids that were soon to be out in the workforce. And we know that ed reps always hear about the jobs before the jobs are posted. And I had a good relationship with the music chair, and he would always tell me, hey, these are solid kids, and these are the ones that probably are not going to be the best band directors, but he would always give me the names of, in the background, and I would seek out these kids and make sure that I got to know them, they knew me, what I did, and would put them in touch with, principals. And because I knew, and it always happens where you have an account, that band director gets another gig at another county over, and the domino effect happens, and you have potentially somebody coming in that you've never done business with, and maybe they're doing it with the competition, but that's been your account. So you can easily lose an account just by that switch in employment. And this was the reason I really wanted to reach out to the music educators. And I always find that these are the kids that are always coming to the MEA shows and really visiting booths. And I have seen so many music stores not pay attention to these kids and not really give them the time of day. And I think that's such a disappointment, because one day you're going to need them. And
Right.
there is such a teacher shortage now, and being that advocate for these kids, and it's not the most rewarding job, obviously, for various reasons, salary, and more programs are having to fight to keep the music programs. And so again, that's why I said earlier about a strong dealer working with the schools and colleges like this. It's a family, it's a community, and you've got to cultivate that and grow that. And you're never going to be that busy where you can't go at the end of the day and visit a college like that. It'll pay dividends beyond what you can put a value on it or put a dollar sign on it. So
Yeah, so true. And it seems like most local state colleges, a lot of those students seem to stick around that same market. So
yeah,
you'll probably see
they
them.
they don't go from, if you're from the University of Florida, they're not going to go all the way to Iowa. I mean, they usually will stay in their state or even in that geographical area. I can't even believe I used University of Florida for an example, because that's not, I should have just used my alma mater, but I don't know why that came to mind, but I guess I humor myself sometimes. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Shane. They're not transient for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very important point about building relationships with those future customers. So the next slide, Milk Run. Private teachers? I'm too busy. Milky Way. Work with the private teachers to build step-up business. So I have a feeling that so many of us listening to this episode right now had a private teacher at some point. The most serious musicians and those who end up in teaching jobs in the industry and things like that, most of us had a private teacher to push us, to get us to become a better musician. And I think it's fair to say that for those of us who had private teachers, those teachers had a huge impact on which instruments we purchased for a step-up instrument and from which store. And there are probably private teachers in your market right now that you don't know as an ed rep, and perhaps even your store doesn't know. Maybe this private teacher came in from another city or another state, moved in, and they have a relationship with a different store many states away even. Maybe they're actually recommending their students do business with that store that they have a relationship with. Maybe they're just recommending that a student go online and buy a particular model, and they don't recommend your store because they don't have a relationship with you. Ed reps can play such an important role in building a relationship with private teachers as well as public school and private school band and orchestra teachers. A lot of times you'll be driving on your way to a school, you'll drive right by this private teacher's house. Or maybe you'll drive right by like a community music school that has lots of teachers that are teaching out of that one building. And with the fact that you're out there and you represent your store, you could bring instruments out to these teachers. You could build a relationship with them. You can drop these instruments off at their studio and literally let that private teacher work with those students and the parents to pick out one of those instruments. And all they do is call the store to give money over the phone. Again, going back to a previous episode with Ryan Richmond in the Trusted Advisor episode, he explains how to do this really well because that's what Ryan used to do. And I competed against him. And I remember he sold so many step-up instruments this way simply by bringing them out into the field, out into the studios. And if your company wants to grow step-up business, this is a great way to do it. It's a great way to add on to what you're already doing in the school band and orchestras. And what you'll typically find is you'll start also selling higher and higher end instruments because obviously those students are the most dedicated. And those parents are also already showing that they support monetarily because I can tell you, I just put my son in private cello lessons and I forgot how much that costs. It is a monetary commitment from parents. So those parents are obviously pretty committed to their students. So private teachers, man, they can do so much for your step-up business. But as an ed rep, you have to actually reach out to them. One of the best ways to find those private teachers, simply ask your band and orchestra teachers, Hey, if you have a flute student that wants to take private lessons, which flute teachers in your area do you recommend? There you go. There's your list of private flute teachers.
A lot of times they'll post them up on a bulletin board. Here's the list of private teachers.
Right. It's right there.
So again, walking in and being observant, you can learn a lot. What's just right in front of you as far as picking up leads on a private teacher like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. So true. All right. Next one. Go ahead, Scott.
So the milk run statement is know the front office staff. The Milky Way is the higher level as far as like administrators and the office staff. We all know that secretary and the way that the world has evolved, that everything is you've got to go through the front office now. The old days where we drive to the back door and they leave it propped open is kind of far and few between probably. So they're the gatekeeper. They're the ones that either are going to let you in or let you out. So we talked about this whole segment is about relationship building, and that's important to build a relationship with that front office person, because obviously you're going to be there every week. You want to be able to kind of know he or she what they like. And I used to bring a cup of coffee to a particular lady that I just knew that she always had her coffee, and for whatever reason she was a McDonald's person and loved McDonald's coffee, and I saw it sitting on her desk and I would bring her, and it just kind of grew into I didn't even have to sign in after that. But I made it a point to really know the principles. I talked to one music store, in fact Shane and I went to, and I said, you guys hand out all these notepads and pencils. I said, why are you not giving them to the front office staff and calendars, or even to the principal? I said, your name's all over it. You should be giving this to them, not just to the band directors, because an administrator governs it. Obviously, we work directly with the orchestra and band director, but that second tier of administration and getting to know them, you'd be surprised how many times principals get moved around. And if an administrator is going to open a new school, boy, you sure would like to be able to call him and go, hey, X music company, you remember me? I'm Scott Leamon from there. And oh yeah, Scott, absolutely, we'd love to have you come service our account. I want to introduce you to the new band director. Many and many a time, an administrator is going to move more times than a band director. And this also includes fine arts coordinator. Having the opportunity to be in front of a mass of educators at an in-service talking about your company or whatever you're bringing is a huge, huge step in bringing service value, because you're going to have that opportunity to be in front of potentially all these customers that may or may not be doing business with you. Maybe this is an area you're going to break ground in. So the ed rep, as I always say, is a walking billboard. They're really they're the name that everybody knows, not so much that they know they work for that music company, but they know the name of the ed rep more than they probably do with the music store first. So I think I like what Amro Music, and I'm going to give them a plug here. Nick, you can send me my royalty check at the end of this, but they used to do a golf outing, and I think they stopped it right before COVID. But anyway, we would have over 120 golfers, and a lot of them were coaches. They were administrators of the school. It wasn't just the band directors. And I caught on real quick why they did that. And those are people that they connect the dots. Those band directors are linked to somebody, and somebody being an administrator like that, because they all play golf. Maybe they're former coaches, as we all know. Sometimes that's how the way you suck as a coach, so you get to be promoted as administrator. So that's always better. So, but anyway, I can't reiterate, when you walk in and you're trying to build that relationship, not only with the music staff, this is the other tiering of this, is building that relationship with the office staff and the administration.
I keep going back to other episodes on Ed Rep Radio, but the very first episode was titled The Red Cross for Band Directors by Charlie Mangini. I love Charlie, and it was such a great episode. He talks a lot about the importance of having a good relationship with those teachers. And one thing he mentioned in that episode is, as an Ed Rep, shoot an email to that principal and say, I was just in this school, your school, and was talking to the band director, watching rehearsal. I just want to say, this is such a great program. Your kids are so well behaved. This is such a gem of a teacher. You're so lucky to have them. Just wanted to drop this line, and hopefully next time I'm in the school, I can drop by and say hi. I thought that was such a great tip.
I forgot. He says that little encouragement, because you don't know what's going on with the band director, and maybe the band director and the administration are not seeing eye to eye, and your timing could be impeccable by doing that and giving that nudge. And I know if Charlie were here, he'd be going, "It's exactly right, Shane. I appreciate that plug. That's exactly what everyone should be doing." So
I love Charlie.
Charlie, if you're listening, I only do that as more in honor, not to make fun.
Yeah, definitely.
I think he's just as good as Dr. Tim. So
yeah,
he's really inspiring.
Yeah.
So those of you listening, I'll give Charlie a plug. If you need someone to come or talk to your band directors, Charlie is a motivator.
Yeah.
Boy, he can fire a group up, and I highly recommend having Charlie out for an in-service. He's just a dynamic person, off screen and on stage. He's down to earth, just humble, willing to help educators.
Yeah, yep, great guy. Yeah, good idea there, Scott. All right, the next one, Milk Run. Who is our rep? Milky Way has vendor reps on phones favorites. When I actually made this slide first, I said speed dial. Then I realized I just dated myself. No one actually has speed dial anymore. It's all on your phones. It's on favorites. I'm old now. So this is basically saying, know who your reps are for the various suppliers of the products that you carry, because they can be such great resources for you to then call on if there's some sort of question about a product, like which tuba would work best in this situation for this teacher. Or maybe the teacher's having some sort of an issue with a product and the teacher's telling you about it. You could actually pick up the phone and call your vendor rep and explain the issue and maybe come up with a solution right there. I think it shows the teachers that you have this team of experts behind you that will offer great resources through you and through the store to then offer to the teacher. It shows that you're well connected, which is great because the teacher sees that you're really a part of the industry. You're a trusted expert because you have access to all this information from these other vendor reps. And honestly, Scott and I will both say that we love getting calls from ed reps. If we can help you help your teacher, everybody wins. Then that's great. So make sure you know who your vendor reps are, because a lot of times you'll find ed reps who don't connect with those other reps that service your store. And that's a little bit of a mystery to them, even who the rep is. So I know it sounds self-serving since Scott and I both work for Eastman, but it's true. For all of your vendor reps, it's good to get to know them. All right, the next category is going to be about business growth, things that you can do to increase your sales numbers. And one of those things, we'll start with the first slide here, Milk Run. My musical necktie sales are doing great. Obviously, that's kind of a bit of a joke. Milky Way, focus on profit centers. If you think about what really keeps a music store in business, most school service music stores will say rentals, band and orchestra rentals, by far number one. And then after that, sometimes it gets a little hazy from an ed rep's perspective as to what really keeps a music store in business. I mean, obviously rentals are the base of it, but what's next? For stores that are in the step-up business that make it a point to sell or rent step-ups, those typically are the next most profitable thing for a music store. And then, honestly, it's just kind of everything else. But if you think about how you spend your time on the road, typically it's those everything else items that make up most of the busy work that you do day after day after day. Your repairs, maybe you're still doing sheet music, your accessories, and things like that. Those things are important to teachers. But honestly, when you compare the potential profitability of rentals and step-ups, those other items really don't compare to how profitable rentals and step-ups are. Sometimes it's easy to get really distracted by all of this busy work of picking up and dropping off repairs and picking up accessories and dropping off accessories to the teachers and all of these things that keep you busy day after day after day. It's easy to forget that the reason you're out there is to grow your rental business and your step-up business. And obviously talk to the owner of your store and their philosophy and things they want you to focus on. But typically, those are the two most important things. But you get so bogged down with all the other things, you forget why you're out there. It's for rentals and step-ups, typically.
Yeah, the next slide is milk run. We might have some trigger trombones at the store. Milky Way drives step-up business to obviously your stores. I think this is important because I always feel like the store staff and the ed reps, there's some disconnect. Ed reps, they're very to themselves. They're out there. Sometimes they don't even go in the store. It may be a couple of days. But if you're having an in-store event, obviously the ed rep is responsible for driving traffic into that event for whatever it is. Maybe it's even a guitar event or a piano day if you're one of those retailers that sells pianos. I mean, it's amazing how many guitar classes are being evolved in music programs now. And I think they need to know, in-store salespeople, that's who I'm referring to, need to know kind of what you do out on the road. I know all of you probably have a schedule and the store staff has it and they say, oh yeah, he comes to your school on that particular day. But do they really know what you really do? So I'm just trying to emphasize bridging the gap between store staff, ed rep staff, and trying to communicate, because obviously it's part of the business and it's something that is valuable for you to be out there soliciting for whatever the event is. Because obviously if you're doing step-ups, most of the time it takes place out in the schools. If all my business did, because I had such a rural route, you wouldn't drive 2 hours into the store. But the areas that I had were half hour away or 20 minutes away from the store and we were doing an in-store event, I'd make sure and sent the flyers and made students aware that we were doing something like that. So this is more of, again, communicating with your store staff and the store manager and supporting that entity of the business.
Yeah. And it also means talking about communicating with the store staff, making sure what's in stock, the brands you carry, the models you carry, understanding way beyond, you might have some trigger trombones in the store, right? You have really good knowledge of what you carry and why you as a company chose each model. And man, ed reps can have such an impact on step-up business if they choose to get involved. It really can grow the step-up business if the ed reps get involved. And we bring this up because not all ed reps are actually really involved with step-up business. Kind of like I was mentioning with focusing on profit centers. And sometimes the step-up business only happens in the store with only in-store staff. But ed reps, you can really make a big impact if you choose to drive that business. The next slide is Milk Run. Not sure on the numbers. Milky Way. Data informs decisions and sets priorities. I used numbers quite a bit when I was an ed rep, and I still do today in my role at Eastman. And I find them very powerful if you really look at the numbers and decipher the meaning behind the numbers. And then those numbers inform how you should proceed, how you should maybe even set your route, which schools are doing a really good business and things like that. And a lot of ed reps, I from riding around with a lot of people, I realized going up to, say, a middle school, I'll ask, hey, how many rentals do you get out of this school? I'm just curious. I think they do okay. I think they're a little up from last year or a little down from last year. That's actually a pretty common response to that question. But knowing the numbers can be so important. And I want to give you some examples of numbers that are good to know. First of all, again, going back to focusing on the profit centers, thinking about rentals. So how many beginners does this particular school have? And let's just say they have 100 beginners. Now, how many rentals did you get from this school? Let's say 30. Okay, well, there's 70 students who didn't rent from you. Where did those students get their instruments? You could ask the teacher, how many of those students are using school-owned instruments? And typically the tubas, tenor saxophones, French horns, baritones, euphoniums, those kind of instruments oftentimes are owned by the school and provided to the students. So maybe there's another 30 that are using school-owned instruments. Okay, so you have 60 accounted for. What about the other 40 that means they got them from somewhere else. Maybe the closet of Uncle Joe, maybe his old trumpet, maybe the internet, maybe a competitor. It's really important to find out, again, using those same numbers, where those 40 students got their instruments. And you could call that opportunity for growth. That set of 40 students, those are students who could potentially rent from you. So understanding what percentage of all the beginners you're renting to gives you a good idea of basically how you're doing with that school. If it's really high, then you're doing great. If you're doing maybe over 50%, then you're doing great. If it's only 15%, well, you probably have some opportunity there. Maybe have some conversations with that teacher about where they recommend students go get their instruments. Or do you see a lot of internet horns coming in from the students? Or is there another store coming in that is providing instruments? So getting to know these numbers can really help you know how to proceed and to work with your schools to then grow those numbers. Next one.
The milk run. I dropped off some posters. The Milky Way, let's go recruit beginners. I know every store has a program and probably they all do recruiting, and everybody does it differently. If you're not doing recruiting, you better get on board and start doing it. And
why is that so important, Scott?
Well, that's the profit center that either keeps you alive or you sink. You know, I know a lot of educators, we would always do testing. In the old days, we called it licking spits.
Oh,
yeah. And the reason why I would always catch a cold from the kid sitting across from me that I was doing clarinet mouthpiecing or a trumpet or whatever. So, and I always enjoyed that more than I did anything, just getting a kid enthusiastic about they're going to join the band. And there are so many people that do such a great job, and some people, all they do is drop off posters. And sometimes it's based on geographically, they would say, well, we can't even go into the schools and do that because there's a policy. You can't do rentals in the school, and all you can do is hand out flyers and that kind of thing. So I know some stores don't get an opportunity to test and set the instrumentation.
And COVID provided some challenges there too, right?
With absolutely.
Sharing reads and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So the main point of this is the more you can recruit and have a program and either however you do it, a presentation or however you walk in and talk about recruiting, because I think that's the one thing a lot of educators, they think they know how to recruit, but they really don't. They think we're going to go to the elementary schools and our band's going to play and I'm going to pass out a letter. And have you ever read the letter? I mean, some of this stuff that I see on preference list or some of it it's dull. It doesn't have the right information. I mean, could be a hero by just giving some pointers about a recruitment letter. Think about, you're an ed rep right now listening to this. Think about the star teacher that is like, they just love he or she, and their letter is so enthusiastic. They always have more than abundant of beginners. That person, you need to be introducing to the director that you're having a problem with.
Good idea.
Why wouldn't you want to do that? That could be a great mentor for that person too. That was one thing I always tried to do, is find somebody that was really just a dynamic, just had the kids eating out of their hand. And if he or she said it, they listened, they just did it. And that's a trait that sometimes you just don't find in all the band directors. But I think, as we all do, at least I did, I always pulled in retired band directors that I made a special point to point out people that I thought were great educators that knew how to do a horn fitting, that knew what to look for when you're sitting in front of a kid. Because just saying, well, here, I've seen some most atrocious things, especially about somebody that didn't know how to play the flute. Well, here, just blow across this head joint, and they would use the analogy of a Coke bottle, and I'm like, let's think about this. Coke bottle hasn't been around in like 40 years, and most kids don't know what a Coke bottle is. So
yeah, good point.
So I think, again, the recruiting part of this, I know stores that spend a lot of time and they reap the benefits, and some of them
Yeah.
they don't do any of this. So I know NASMD, there's always been a session about recruiting, so people have different ideas, but we probably should do one on recruiting. I don't know. I mean, maybe we will.
Yeah, I
but
do want to have an episode specifically on recruiting because this is such an important topic. Going back to the idea of numbers, numbers aren't just important to an ed rep to know how to grow their business, but numbers are also important to a teacher's job. If you don't have enough students in your program, then you'll go from full-time teaching to part-time teaching, or they'll cut the program. It's much easier to cut a small program than it is to cut a large, thriving one with lots of supportive parents behind it. If you really want to be a hero, you can literally help a teacher save their job by helping them recruit lots of beginners. And I've seen it time and time again from personal experience and talking to other ed reps where maybe they went from 40 beginners to 80 beginners or 100 beginners. And that program just got a new breath of life because all of a sudden it's booming.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, because a lot of that is going to determine funding too.
Mm-hmm.
If the administration doesn't see you growing the program and you're wanting to go and you're coming to them for money, well, why would they do that? Why would we pump you any more money? You haven't done any. The kids are not coming in the program. In fact, you're not going to teach band 5 periods. You're going to teach now 2 periods of band, and now we're going to do general music, and you're going to do lunchroom duty, and so. It's funny how an educator will go, they never want to look in the mirror and say, what's the problem here? So an ed rep can help that person with the recruiting part of it to build those numbers where they can go back and reflect. And you know what? There's the other thing about recruiting. At the end of it, do a checklist. What can we do better next year? Why is it that we didn't get as many flute players? Because we didn't put the emphasis on it. I remember one time band director says, man, I really need trombones, but he would never demo a trombone.
Huh. Well,
but he had tons of clarinets and trumpets. I wonder why. And he would always bring up one of those kids to play. And I said, well, how about you demonstrate it? I mean, you would think that something that simple, but it didn't occur to them like, well, yeah, I didn't do the trombone. So yeah. I mean, kids are so visual with everything. I mean, look at how big the video game thing is. God, they're just glued to it. But I think a lot of directors if they are detached with what's going on and what's the most modern day music going on, what are kids listening to, you kind of have to use that as a recruiting tool because it's music. It has musical instruments in it. It may not be what's in the band, but hey, you could have that band play that.
Yeah, something fun. Yeah, you're so right. You could do an entire episode or 3 on just recruiting. And let's not forget, going back to what the profit center thing. Well, if you recruit more beginners, you can rent more instruments, and it's going to help the business, and it's also going to help your programs.
Yeah, exactly.
So next one, Milk Run. I think we're having a sale this weekend. Milky Way works in concert with in-store staff, promotions, and company-wide goals. You touched on this earlier, Scott, about making sure that you communicate with the in-store staff on all sorts of things. And it's easy sometimes to feel as an ed rep that you're just your own separate entity out there, completely separate from the store. And it's easy to feel that way because you're physically away from the store all day long, every day. And I think you kind of miss a lot of opportunities to grow the business if you're such a lone wolf out there, because maybe there's a great sale coming up at the store and you have such power as an ed rep to promote that out in the schools, whether it's through flyers, emails, face-to-face, maybe actually get in front of a rehearsal and tell the whole band about the sale you're having. But if you don't know you're having a sale, or you don't know what's on sale or what the focus is for the sale because you hadn't communicated with your store, you won't be nearly as powerful. Maybe there's a new product line at the store that your owner really would like to get out there and push and grow sales in this particular product line or even a particular model. You as an ed rep can have such a powerful impact on how those sales go. But again, if you're not communicating with the store and finding out what those bigger goals are, you'll continue to kind of do what you do out there separately from from the inside store staff and those things they're focusing on. And those big company goals just won't be achieved as quickly or as well if you don't get involved. And in this, I see this in all industries. There's the outside staff and there's the inside staff. And oftentimes they just do their own things and don't understand each other either. So there's this sometimes animosity between the two groups. So if you work really closely, hand in hand, with what's going on in the store, remembering that you are the face of that store out in the schools, things just seem to go so much better for the whole company.
Yeah, the next category we came up with was something called personal growth. We talked about business, but what goals do you have for yourself as an ed rep? So the first slide, well, this is you, Shane. I forgot.
That's all right. Yeah, that's all right. I'll go ahead here. So Milk Run, I know enough to get by. Milky Way, I have a growth mindset. This is such an important one, I think, for life, really. Having a growth mindset means you're never satisfied with what you currently know. You always want to learn more. You're never satisfied with your current performance. You're always trying to push it and grow, maybe grow numbers, maybe grow more accounts. You're always trying to get better at something. Never quite satisfied. And I want to use my wife's grandpa is 100 years old, and he is just an amazing human being. And we were celebrating his 100th birthday last fall, and I said, "So, what's your secret? Well, honestly, how? Because he's doing great. He still golfs. He just barely stopped driving, which is probably good." I said, "What's your secret? It's amazing how much you can do as a 100-year-old person." He said, "Never stop, never stop. Always keep moving. Always keep growing. He's always keep mentally and physically stimulated." And he said, "That's how I got to 100, just by having this kind of mindset." And it's so true. And if you have a growth mindset as an ed rep, well, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably somebody with a growth mindset because you're wanting to learn more and you're wanting to get better at the job. So such an important thing. And also, I think teachers like to do business with ed reps with that excited, interested growth mindset. It's more engaging. It's more interesting. I read a lot of sales books, and one thing that really stuck out to me is this phrase: "It's better to be a green rep than a blue one." And it took me a second to figure out what that means, but basically a green rep is somebody who's new to the job. They're excited. They're wanting to learn more. They're wanting to grow into this position. A blue rep is somebody who's maybe a little burned out, someone who's a little tired. They're not super excited about the job anymore, and they don't really come with excitement to the schools, to the teachers. That green rep, the one maybe with even less experience, might do better because they are excited and they're growing. All right, next one, Scott.
The Milk Run, I'll figure this out on my own. A Milky Way finds a mentor. I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about how I got in the music business, and Ronnie Bush had been a big influence on me, and seeing him as a manufacturer rep. And still to this day, I will go to him and have questions and, "Hey, what did you do when you were a manufacturer rep in this kind of situation?" And typically there's a chuckle, and then he's actually saying, "Well, I don't understand why you're calling me about this. You're pretty smart." But it's just sometimes to reinforce my thinking. It's not that I don't know it. I mean, I just need that reassurance. And I think a mentor, there's a lot of hats you wear as an ed rep. There's a lot of challenges, and you're going to walk in and there's going to be a band director that's going to have a bad day, and they're going to kind of maybe not be very nice to you about it. And at some point maybe you just need to call and vent. But I still have a couple of ed reps that still call me to this day, and we don't talk really about Eastman stuff. We really talk about just, "Hey, what's going on?" I really enjoy it. I'm flattered by it, because a lot of times organizations, music stores, they don't have anybody they can relate to what they're doing. The store manager they don't do the ed rep thing. Maybe the store owner has never done the ed rep thing. So just finding someone even outside the music industry can be that mentor for you.
I'll throw in there, just in my neighborhood here, my mentor isn't in the music industry at all. He works in the furniture manufacturing business, but it's a very similar job to I do, and he's been doing it longer than I have. And it's amazing to have conversations with this person, even though it's not in the same industry. It's very inspiring and learn a lot. So that's a good point. Just wanted to jump in there, Scott. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think I've kind of said what I want to say about finding a mentor. But if you're listening and you don't have somebody, hell, I'll be your mentor. But I think it'll do you psychologically. I think you need that just because
Yeah.
of what you're challenged with every day, day in and day out. And it's not an easy gig. So yeah, I think this is something that if you're not doing this or trying to find somebody you can really entrust in.
Yeah, great points. Next slide. Milk Run. I'm pretty much winging it. Milky Way. I always have goals. This is so important, going back to why the milk run happens in the first place, because you walk in without a whole lot of direction, without a whole lot in your mind as to what you want to accomplish. So having short-term goals, even where you knowing what you want to accomplish with that visit, or what your goal is for that day, or that week, or that month, or that year, and zooming out to what's your goal for your career. Where do you want to be in 5, 10, 20 years? People with goals like that tend to get up in the morning with a little more enthusiasm. They know what they want to accomplish, and just that feeling alone can be really invigorating. There's a term that I recently read about called decision fatigue, where if you have no idea what you're doing for the day, for example, and you're constantly reacting and having to decide what to do here or there, it can be really quite draining. And you feel like you're really not in charge of your day. You feel like you're constantly being kind of pushed in one direction or another. But people with goals, they tend to have a very steady direction and a good feeling of purpose. So if you don't have any short, medium, long-term goals, maybe one of these days, just take a few hours and go to a park or somewhere where you can really just think clearly and start writing some long-term, medium-term, short-term goals down. And it's amazing how your life just starts to kind of form around those goals, and you have a great sense of direction instead of wondering what's going to happen that day.
Yeah, the next slide at Milk Run, I do the job for the company, Milky Way. I take ownership. I'll say this, and it kind of rings true when I was working for Music and Arts. There was a CFO. I mean, Alan Greenberg is. I really liked what he had to say, and he wasn't just a BS guy. He said, if this was your money, how would you spend it? And he was also the same guy that said, for every dollar we spend, we got to make 3. Now that's the CFO part.
Mm-hmm.
But he is right. You take ownership of this territory or your route, your schools, you take pride in it. And I said earlier, all the effort you put into this and this gig, that's the ownership of it. And you sure as heck are not going to let somebody take it away from you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are, that reflects on you. And you have to say, if you got beat by somebody, as Ric Flair says, to be the man, you got to beat the man. And I think that's true. I mean, you cultivated it, you work it, you reap the benefits of it. And a lot of times I just don't think that ed reps, they think that this is their passion. They think it's a cool thing that they're going to go around and call on their friends. But at the end of the day, if you're not passionate about it, then there is no ownership in it. It's just a day in and day out.
Just do the
clock
job.
in and clock out.
Yeah.
As I like what Charlie said. He said, this is not a destination. It's a journey. And, the destination means you've arrived. The journey is you continue on and you continue. It really doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't have an end, but it definitely will reflect, and it will reflect on everything you're doing with this. And having goals is obviously just what you just said. That's the ownership part of this. So
I want to jump in and recommend a book that I read recently that was amazing on this topic of ownership. The title of the book is called Extreme Ownership, and it was written by 2 former Navy SEAL leaders. Leif Babin was one writer, and Jocko Willink is another writer. And I do want to say that this book might not be for everybody from the tone of the book. I was fascinated by it, just the way that they led the SEALs and the way that they took absolute ownership as a leader of their group. So you could say as an ed rep is the owner or leader of their territory. So it if you're interested at all in the military at all, it's really fascinating. But the book talks about extreme ownership. If, like you said, Scott, if you don't get that rental night, do you blame it on your competitors? Do you blame it on your store for not having the right instruments or something? Or do you blame it on yourself? Do you take ownership yourself and look at yourself and say, okay, how can I do better? What did I not do well? Did not earn this rental night? Take ownership in that way. And again, extreme ownership, Leif Babin, Jocko Willink. It's really a great book. It's a great audiobook too. That's actually how I listened to it. And the writers were the readers, and it's just really cool. And it'll change your perspective on life, on taking ownership over things. All right, the next one, Milk Run. This is burning me out. Milky Way. I make time for myself. This is so important. As you mentioned, Scott, there's no end to this job. You can just keep going and going and going. There's no clocking out. You don't go home and you leave work behind you. It always seems to be a part of your life. Your phone is on and teachers are calling and emailing and texting. It can burn you out if you're not careful, especially if you work 70 hours a week for several weeks, getting out there at the back to school season, doing all these rentals. It can literally burn you out to the point where you have no more excitement for the job. You haven't seen your family. You're just kind of done.
And they're selling all those Eastman tubas. And they're wearing their vendor rep out, and
right.
I mean, it's
so much work.
It's so much work.
So take time for yourself. If you feel yourself getting to that point where you're just not excited to get up in the morning to go do this job, you're not excited to talk to teachers, you just don't feel right, take time for yourself. Sharpen the axe. Go take a vacation. Refresh yourself, because you're good to nobody. Burned out. Not good to yourself. Not good to your family. Not good to your business or your teachers or your customers. Take time for yourself, and you'll know when that time is. And there's no shame in turning off the phone sometimes and focusing on your family, because you need to. You need to as a human being, because again, there's no end to the job. You have to decide what the parameters are. And some people have this amazing ability of working all the time and feel energized all the time. Other people, they literally need to decompress for a few hours a night. And if that's you, turn off your phone. And we're not saving lives here. We're talking about musical instruments. So sometimes those reads can wait if it means you need to recharge and be with your family. That's the last slide. That was fun. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, it was.
So again, we're going to put this slideshow in the episode notes so you can go through these slides and see the text and see each slide and even follow along as you're listening, if that helps. But Scott and I are always here if we can be of any assistance to you out there on the road. We were ed reps and we were leaders of ed reps, but I think also just the fact that we've witnessed so many different ed reps around the country and what works and what doesn't work and what makes a great ed rep, from just getting to know all of you out there and riding along with you. If we can be of any help, please reach out. Scott, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
My email is pretty simple. It's sleamon, so SLEAMON @ eastmanstrings.com. That's going to be the best way to get a hold of me. My cell phone is 770-630-6103. So that's the bat phone. And yes, I do turn it off at night because, I mean, as you said, I I have a time where I just have to decompress myself. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody, and all calls are welcome, and emails.
Yeah. And again, anybody's welcome to email edrepradio@eastmanstrings.com. I get those emails, so I'm happy to respond. And if there's anything we can do to help, let us know. We're always happy to. Thanks for your time, Scott. Much appreciated.
Absolutely, my friend. And I'm glad we got to do this. And hopefully I can come back to Ed Rep Radio. We'll talk about something else.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you all got something out of this session, even if it's just one or two little tidbits that help make you a little more confident and effective out there. That's great. We hope you found the information in this episode useful and something you can use in your everyday life as an ed rep. If there is a topic you'd like to learn more about and have presented on a future episode of Ed Rep Radio, or you'd like to give us some feedback in general, please email us at edrepradio@eastmanstrings.com. To learn more about Eastman Music Company, go to our website, eastmanmusiccompany.com, or give your Eastman rep a call. Thanks, and drive safe.